What's up, guys, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Robbie Cassidy, and today we're going to talk about returning back to play after an injury. Okay, why I want to talk about this and the way this podcast is going to be focused is that basically in the next couple of weeks or months, we have championship coming up for GAA players. There's a lot of competitions coming up, and there's more marathons coming up for people. And I want to cover a topic that I often get asked about is like, how do you transition from your rehab into your play or back into play again? And the way I'm going to look at it is I'm going to say, why do a lot of us get re-injured soon after rejoining or getting back into training, as well as what do we need to focus on before we get back into it? Okay, and if we can nail those two things down, then we can actually start reducing your risk of injury and improving your performance overall. And that's the goal of this, and it's going to be the goal of this podcast, is that you're going to have an idea if you're ready to get back to training, and you'll have a better idea of how to transition back into it. So I'm going to jump into it, and I'm going to talk about a lot of the issues that people have, and then after that I'm going to talk about what to focus on to reduce the likelihood of those. So to jump right into it, why do most of us, or I shouldn't say most, why do many of us get re-injured soon after we get back into training? And a lot of the time we can get the same injury, or other times we get a different injury and another injury kicks up. Well, I think too many of us jump back into 100% too soon, okay? And what I mean is that there's no transition period between what you do in the gym versus what you do on the pitch, or what you do in your track sessions, or on your track sessions. And what will happen there is that your body is able to tolerate the stress that you put on it and the load that you put on it in the gym. But when you move back into a more chaotic environment, you haven't a lot of the time bridged the gap there. Okay, so I think that we need to look at bridging the gap a small bit better and having more of a progression into it, that it's not just focus on your rehab and then get back into it. There should be like more of a progression of like rehab, then you have like rehab performance, focus a small bit more rehab performance, and then you're moving into your performance stage completely, so that you're getting yourself back up to the same level or even higher than you were before. And I think that's a point that I probably should dwell on a couple of minutes, is that you have to also think about it. If you're training with a team, when you left the team, from the time that you left the team because of injury and the time that you're getting back, their fitness is going to be a lot higher, if they're still training, that is. So you need to think about that when you're getting back into it, in that if it's, let's say you get injured at the end of the league and they have another game to play, well, they're going to play that game and then they're going to train a couple of times as well after that. And their fitness then will have, or the cardiovascular fitness, their strength, their coordination, everything, the skills, everything will have improved. Now, it might not be massive, but it's still going to be a good bit. And that's why a lot of people miss out on it, is that they probably don't get themselves back to 100%, or they look at what they were able to do before, they get themselves back to that level, and then they jump into a training session where everyone is maybe 10 or 15% or 20% fitter than them, stronger than them, and then they just can't catch up. So they pick up the same injuries again. Okay, so this is a huge one. And the example I like to use is that when we look at, we'll keep the kind of focus on GAA for a second, because it's an easy example to make, but you can apply it to all your sports, is that if you have a game, okay, let's say you're averaging around about 1,500 meters of high-speed running in each game. Now, that's as the league goes on, but as the year goes on, okay, hopefully that will be increasing. So it might be 1,700, then it could be 2,000, and it could be 2,500 after that. And if you're looking at an inter-county standard, a lot of them are covering around about 3,000 meters. Okay, so you're running on average 1.5k. You pull a hamstring, you step back, and then you have to start training again. You're doing your work in the gym, you're doing your mobility work as well, and you're doing your balance coordination work. You're starting to get back into training, you're upping your pace, and by the time you get back to training, which for the average hamstring injury is probably 2 to 3 weeks. Some of them are longer, depending on severity, obviously. But by the time you get back into training, the average that a player on your team could be covering high speed running wise could be 2,000. meters now. So now you're there, you have to bridge that gap of it could be 400 meters. Then that's a lot in a training session, especially in a match situation, in that if you're marking that player, you have to keep up to them a lot. Like, what's the word for it? You need to, and you're trying to keep up with them if the ball's coming in, for a lot more sprints than you would expect. Okay, because most sprints are around about 30 to about 30 meters, let's say, 15 to 30 meters. So you have to do that 10 or 15 times more than what you would have done before you came back. So is your body able to tolerate that load, that new load? And the same thing could be with, let's say, running. If you're with a club, is that their fitness has improved, so they're running better times, and you're trying to keep up to the times that they're running. So you're pushing yourself, and you're pushing yourself probably in a lot of situations harder than your body can handle as it's getting back into it. And as a result, then you're at risk of re-injuring that area again. So you obviously need to be setting high goals of what you want to get back to, but you also need to be realistic about what you're doing and making sure that you're progressing into it over time, and that it's not just trying to go from 0 to 100 in as quick as possible, the quickest time as possible, or shortest time as possible. Okay, so that's a huge one. Now, and hopefully that makes sense, is how you need to get back up to what the team is at, as opposed to just what you were at before. Now, the next thing is that, and it kind of talks about what I was just talking, or I suppose it covers what I was just talking about, is that a lot of the time rehab doesn't actually replicate the activity that you're doing. And I see this so often with people who get the same injury over and over again, is that they pull a hamstring, they go to the gym, and then they do all your Nordic curls and your hamstring bridges and your RDLs, and they do all the mobility work, but they pull the hamstring at the end of a game. Let's say they pull the hamstring in the 50th minute of a game while doing a sprint. Well, on what level does that replicate that? You in the gym doing your Nordic curls and your hamstring bridges, as opposed to you on the pitch sprinting when you're fatigued after somebody, maybe doing a few cuts, maybe deceleration. Deceleration is a lot of the time when a hamstring goes, as when you're slowing down, as opposed to actually when you're speeding up. So that could be it. You hit the ground hard, you're fatigued, hamstring goes, now you're back in the gym, you're doing all the right strengthening work, but there's no transition there to actually getting running in, and then getting running with cuts in, and then introducing fatigue and actually running at speed while fatigued. Okay, so there's a lot of different blocks there that you need to overcome, as opposed to just hit the gym, get it as strong as possible, and then hopefully when you get back you should be good. Because they're so different. Nordic curls and sprinting, even though you're using similar muscles, they're not very similar movements. Okay, so that's why the Nordic curl, although it's an excellent hamstring rehab exercise for building strength, it still needs to be incorporated with the other work as well. Now, I think when you're looking at that, the next thing then is that comes to mind is that when you do get back to training, and when you're jumping back into it, and you're starting to replicate the activities, and you're on the pitch and you're practicing short sprints and you're practicing cuts, how often, and anyone that's listened to this podcast, I'm sure it's happened to you at some stage, especially with a team sport, has somebody asked you to step back into training when you're not ready? So they said, will you just step into this drill? We're short players, I need you to fill it up. Now, although on a base level you're thinking this probably isn't a big issue, this is a huge time that people get re-injured, and they set themselves back 2 or 3 weeks again on top of the original injury because they step back in too early. And I can speak to this even just being out here, in that we play like with a 7-a-side team, and we barely ever have just about 8 players every week. And I had a calf injury. I was carrying a calf injury for about 5 weeks because I just kept it was a game every Tuesday and every Friday, just because we had the bare minimum of players. I was stepping back in and say I'll do 15 minutes or I'll do 20 minutes when I wasn't ready to do it. And the injury just kept on happening, just re-happening little, like it just kept on flaring up, and then I wouldn't be able to run. And at a certain stage I was just like, all right, I need to take my own advice here now and step back and take the time out and miss a couple of games and really just focus on. And if we have to forfeit a game because we don't have enough players, that's grand. At least then the rest of the games we'll be able to play at a good level. And it worked well. Just step back. I took a bit of time to recover, did my own rehab. It's funny how things happen. We actually, for some reason, other players just started to join then, so we got more guys, and they were able to play away, didn't really forfeit any games, and I got back and I was able to play again. Okay, I know this happens all the time in GAA because you'll be sitting out and there'll be a selector there, while the manager or the trainer is running the session, and he'll be kind of hanging around just to see how you're getting on. He might ask you, like, what way are you? How long do you think it is before you're back? And then, you can maybe jump in that drill there. What they're only doing it, you can do it at your own pace. And then as soon as you're in the drill, a lot of the time with people, ego kicks in, and you try to get back up to the pace of the other players because you don't want to be seen as somebody who's not fit enough or somebody who's not good enough. And then you're in a chaotic environment, you're at risk of injury again. Okay? So that's a huge one. You need to make sure that, first off, if you go to training and you're rehabbing, you know exactly what you can do and what you shouldn't do. If you do have an idea of that, then you can say to them before, the physio said, I need to be able to go back in. I have a certain amount of rehab that I need to get through. I have a certain amount that I need to, or before I can get into this full, or before I can get back into training. Or maybe it's that I can do some short-sided games, small bit of kicking, but I need to step out when I start to get fatigued. It could be that I can stand in and do hand passing, but I can't do any all-out sprinting. Okay, and maybe most likely the last thing that you'll jump into is like full contact sports, because that's very chaotic. It's very hard to control that. You should step in with more controlled exercises and drills at the start, and like warm-up stuff like that are usually very good for it. After that, then you're stepping into more chaotic things like with tackling and cutting and sprinting and stopping and all that. Okay, so that's a huge one. They're really the main reasons that people don't get back in, or people get injured when they get back into training. So it's kind of what I always say to people, and I'll talk about this in more detail, is you need to look at your training session before you get there. What can you do in each part of the training? When should you step in? When should you step out? Okay? As I said before, a lot of the time there's no transition period. The injury hasn't fully recovered. You're still playing with a niggle, and then you get back in and then you re-injure it and you're out for another week or 2 weeks. As I was saying with my calf, it was a non-stop, consistent theme. On a Friday, I'd injure it again. I'd come back then, hopefully on the Tuesday, and I might say I'll step in for 5 or 10 minutes, and then that would drag out to 15 or 20 minutes, and then I'd feel it flaring up again. Not that I wasn't re-injuring it every time, but it was just flaring up and getting really sore, and I was on the brink of it again, so I'd step out. And because I was pushing it too much, it just wasn't giving it a chance to recover fully. So they're the main ones. General fitness then isn't up to that of the play of what it was before, because you have to think that your team or your club, running club or whatever it is, will have their fitness will have improved from when you last trained. So you need to take care of that area. And then you need to look at the other factors. Are they still at play? So if you injured yourself, okay, before, but at the time you were only sleeping 5.5 hours per night because you were staying up till 1 a.m. and you had to be up at 7 a.m. for work every morning, and you don't address that factor, you can do all the rehab and running and transition and return to sport exercises in the world, but it's not going to reduce your risk of injury that much. You'll get away with it for a while, but in general, the main contributor to injury hasn't been dealt with, and as a result, you can see a lot of these injuries kick up again. Okay, so sleep is a huge one. The next one is like diet and hydration, and I did a podcast with Mike Nicholson. He's a performance nutritionist. It's probably about 4 or 5 podcasts ago before this one, and we basically talked about like fueling before, fueling during, and fueling after. So I think it's best that you just go listen to that, and you'll have a better idea. But a lot of the time, people weren't taking in enough. They weren't really optimizing their recovery when it came to diet, and as well as that, they weren't timing it right, or in some situations they weren't eating at all because they were training late at night and they should be taking in something small after, and they were missing out on it. So in that, he kind of details everything that you should do, when you should do it, and how you should do it. So he goes into a lot of detail, and I'd be only brushing over it if I talked about it. So I think you should definitely check that out. Hydration, another huge one. Just keeping on top of that on a day-to-day as well as when you're training. And then stress is another massive one. Now, when we look at stress, and when I'm looking at stress right now, I'm looking at it on a nervous system level. Okay, I'm not just looking at little stressors that happen on a day-to-day. I'm looking at how your body reacts to it, because you need to take care of this. You need to be able to get into a recovery state when the opportunity arises. And what you'll find, a lot of people who struggle to get into recovery states will go to bed at night, they'll lie down and they won't get to sleep. And they'll find that their sleep will be disrupted. They never really can turn their alertness down. They can never really get into a deep sleep because they don't practice this throughout the day. And it could be mini stressors that are adding up, because when you look at your nervous system, it's very simply, and I've talked about this a lot on multiple podcasts before. You have your sympathetic nervous system, which is high alertness, which is energy, using as much energy as possible, and they also call it a fight or flight state. Your parasympathetic then is more of a rest and digest state, and that's a healing and recovery state, basically. Okay, we're keeping things basic here, just so they're easier to understand. Now, if you are always stuck in that fight or flight, always stuck in that kind of energy, or high energy state, you'll find that when you try to get into a resting state, it's going to be a lot more difficult. So what you need to look at is how many times throughout the day are you able to get into those recovery states. Now, it maybe only be for 3 or 4 minutes at a time, but the better you get at that, the better your sleep will be at night and the better your training will be. Okay, so how many times can you turn down the alertness and get into more recovery state and rest and digest state? And this is where the likes of meditation and journaling, breathing, taking naps, stepping out, de-stressing, going for walks in nature, where these really come into play, because that trains you to get into that recovery state on a day-to-day. You're not just waiting for nighttime to get into that state. Okay, so if you want to train hard, you need to be able to recover just as well. Now, what do we need to focus on before we get back? And I'll have covered some of these already in what I just talked about, but I'm going to brush over them again so you have a better idea, and I'll focus in on a few. So, as we know, the first one is you need to take time to get it better than it was before. Okay, because of the team is going to be improving all the time, I would be looking at breaking your training session down into maybe 4 quarters, where you do the first quarter, you jump into the training, maybe the warm up and that, and you step out and you do your rehab. Then you go and jump into half the training, step out and do your rehab. 3 quarters of training, step out, and then into the full one once able. Okay, if you do it that way, it's a really simple approach, but it's very effective, because you get a better idea of how your body reacts to the training and the drills that you're doing. Some drills you may get away with, and you can say, okay, well, if that drill happens later on in training or something similar to it, I'll jump into that. And in some drills you'd be like, that was way too much impact with high velocity, and I can't handle that right now. So you'd step out of it and you'd step into the ones that are a bit more controlled. Okay, that's the first one. When you're coming back from rehab, you're looking at jumping into more controlled ones first, and then in chaotic after. All right. Now, the other side of things is that as you get more fatigued, you're at more of a risk of injury. So you kind of flip that around then as you get into it more. So the more chaotic ones at the start, then as you get better, and then you look at the more controlled ones at the end, just because they're less injury. There's less of an injury risk to them, I should say. But on a basic sense, it's about stepping in and out and becoming aware of your body and knowing when to step out, because it's as big an issue knowing when to step out as it is actually stepping out. You can be stepping out and you could be doing it too early, or you could be stepping out and saying, okay, that was perfect time to do it. So that's another one. And I think that the better you get at that, the better you will be at, or the faster you will return to play. Okay. Now, on top of that, don't be under pressure to step back in before it's time. Go with the idea of maybe sending a text to the manager before, telling them what you can jump into. It could be that you just talked to a few players before, and maybe a few selectors and that, and just say, I can jump into some short sprints, but I can't do any tackling yet. Okay, I can't play the game at the end. We'll see how we feel is always a good one. And then I just want to be cautious of this for today is another one that works well. And just the physio told me that I need to get these certain exercises done after. So I'll do what I can before that, but I need to get these in, and I need to be good, at full fitness when I'm getting these in. And just making sure that they're aware of it. Having a good relationship with them and throughout the rehab process is the best way of doing this. And just being like, okay, right, I can feel like I can push it a small bit more today, but I will have to step out if it gets tight. And the thing is, any smart manager or coach will want you back in training. So they want you back in training fully. They don't want you just being another number. So if you say that to them, they should be like, okay, they should be able to reason and say, right, he's able to step into this and he can step out. And they will want you back playing at 100%. The better you get at this, the faster you'll improve. Okay, the worse you are at this, the slower you will improve. So it is a bit of a like it's a necessity to be able to step in and to build that relationship as you go through the rehab process. Now, as I said there, avoid jumping into chaotic environments too soon. That's a huge one for people, is that they get into something that's just too difficult for them, that's maybe a bit too high level, ego takes over, and then they get injured. And I think you really want to just keep it controlled at the start and then start increasing levels of chaos as you go through that. Okay? So when it falls back in it, make sure there's a transition period so that you do your gym work and then you do the work that you do the exercises, or you replicate the exercises that you got injured in. So if it's sprinting, if it's jumping, if it's cutting, if it's tackling, you need to start introducing those at a lower level and building them back up. And just being in the gym doesn't work for that. You need to be able to get back into training and step in and out. It could be that you do it in the warm-up before training with a friend and just see how you're feeling. And it could be after training when you're fatigued that you look to introduce it a small bit more, but controlled. All right? If you're able to do that effectively, you'll find that this will improve a lot quicker. So it's something that people need to get better at. If you do get better at it though, it's a massive skill to have. It's a massive asset to have as well. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about today, because I won't go on too much more about it. I think we've covered it enough in enough detail that you should have a better idea of basically when you should step in and out, how you should return to play. And if you have niggles and things like that you're a bit worried about, it's better just to have it in the back of your head that if this kicks up, I will step out, as opposed to just being always trying to push through everything. Okay? But that's all for me today, guys. If you are struggling with an injury, or if you're struggling with an ongoing issue, just send me a message on Instagram at mobilitytutor, or you can send me an email which is mobilitytutor@gmail.com. And I'll be able to point you in the right direction of what you need to do. And if you need help, or if you need a plan laid out, I also will be able to help you with that too. It is coming around the year of championship, coming around the time of the year for championship now. So the last thing you want to be doing is sitting on the sideline looking in when the opportunity comes. So if you are having any issues, it's better just reach out and we can talk about it. And you don't have to commit to anything then yet. That's the most important thing. But at least I'll be able to point you in the right direction of what you need to work on. I would also love, if you know anyone who's struggling with an injury, to pass this podcast on to them. At least they'll have a better idea of what to do, especially if it's a teammate, of what to do when they're getting back to training. I'd love if you could rate it on Spotify and iTunes. It's a big help for just getting the podcast out there a small bit more. And yeah, I'd really appreciate if you could do that. And the last thing is if you could leave a comment on, I don't think you can do it on Spotify, I think you can only do that on iTunes, as well as share it on your story on Instagram if you took something from it. Other than that, I hope everyone's doing well. I hope training's going well as we start to get into the summer at home in Ireland. And that is, I suppose that's all. Have a good one.